A luxurious yacht glides through the misty English Channel, its opulent decks hiding a chilling secret. Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a wealthy philanthropist, lies dead, a sapphire-encrusted dagger in his heart. Who among the elite guests, his grieving widow, a cunning financier, a rising actress, or a meticulous solicitor, wielded the blade? As Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps aboard, every clue, a mysterious scent, a misplaced shawl, a threatening letter, points to a web of greed, betrayal, and hidden motives. Can Poirot's little gray cells unravel the truth before the killer strikes again? Dive into Murder on the Sapphire Yacht, a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery where suspense lurks in every shadow and no one is what they seem.
Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The Sapphire Yacht glided silently through the glassy waters of the English Channel, its sleek silhouette a vision of elegance against the fading amber of the August sunset. The vessel, a marvel of modern craftsmanship, was the pride of its owner, Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a retired industrialist whose fortune in steel had afforded him every luxury, including this floating palace. The yacht was not merely a mode of transport, but a statement of opulence, its polished teak decks gleaming under the soft glow of lanterns, its cabins adorned with velvet drapes and mahogany furnishings. Tonight, it carried a select company of guests, invited for a week-long voyage to celebrate Sir Reginald's 60th birthday, a celebration that promised to be as grand as the man himself. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal friend and occasional chronicler of Hercule Poirot's exploits, stood at the starboard railing, a glass of champagne in hand. The sea air was crisp, tinged with salt and the faintest hint of lavender from the sachets tucked into the cushions of the deck chairs. Hastings, a man of simple tastes, despite his frequent brushes with high society, felt a quiet unease beneath the evening's polished veneer. The guests, though impeccably dressed and unfailingly polite, seemed to carry an undercurrent of tension, like a tightly wound spring waiting to snap. He could not quite place the source of his disquiet, but his instincts, honed by years at Poirot's side, told him something was amiss. The gathering was small but illustrious, a carefully curated circle of Sir Reginald's closest associates. There was Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, Sir Reginald's wife of 20 years, a statuesque woman with a sharp tongue and a penchant for emeralds that glittered at her throat. Her laughter, bright and frequent, rang across the deck, though Hastings noted a certain brittleness to it, as if it were a performance for an audience of one. Beside her stood Dr. Simon Caldwell, a Harley Street physician, whose calm demeanor and piercing gray eyes suggested a man accustomed to keeping secrets. He was Sir Reginald's personal doctor and, rumor had it, a trusted confidant. Then there was Miss Clara Dunley, a young actress whose meteoric rise on the London stage had made her the darling of the society pages. Her auburn hair cascaded in soft waves, and her smile was as radiant as the chandelier in the yacht's dining saloon. Yet Hastings observed how her eyes darted nervously toward Sir Reginald, as if seeking his approval. Next to her, Mr. Victor Langley, a financier with a reputation for ruthless ambition, sipped his whiskey with a smirk that suggested he knew more than he let on. His wife, Mrs. Evelyn Langley, a quiet woman with a penchant for knitting, seemed out of place among the glittering company, her fingers working ceaselessly at a skein of pale blue wool. The final guest was Mr. Julian Travers, Sir Reginald's solicitor, and a man of meticulous habits, whose pince-nez gleamed as he adjusted them to study the menu for the evening's dinner. Travers was the sort of man who seemed to live for details, his notebook always at hand, filled with cryptic jottings. I wondered what secrets those pages held, for Travers had a reputation for discretion that rivaled even Poirot's. The crew, too, warranted attention. Captain Mortimer, a weathered seafarer with a gruff voice and a limp from an old injury, commanded the yacht with quiet authority. The steward, Mr. Harold Blake, moved among the guests with the grace of a dancer, his tray of drinks never faltering. And then there was Miss Elsie Tanner, the cook, whose culinary creations were the talk of the voyage, though she remained below decks, unseen by the guests. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sir Reginald clapped his hands, drawing the company's attention. "My dear friends," he began, his voice rich with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. "Tonight we celebrate not merely my birthday, but the bonds that unite us, to friendship, to loyalty, and to the sea." He raised his glass, and the guests followed suit, their murmurs of agreement mingling with the clink of crystal. Yet Hastings noticed that not all smiles reached the eyes. Lady Beatrice's gaze lingered on her husband with a flicker of something, resentment perhaps. Miss Dunley's toast was hesitant, her fingers tightening around her glass, and Mr. Langley's smirk widened, as if he knew a jest the others did not. Dinner was served in the dining saloon, a room of such splendor that it rivaled the grandest London hotels. The table was set with silver and fine china, the centerpiece, a cascade of white roses. The meal began with a consommé, followed by poached salmon and a rack of lamb, each course a testament to Miss Tanner's skill. Conversation flowed, though Hastings noted the careful dance of words, as if each guest were guarding a secret. Sir Reginald spoke of his plans to expand his charitable foundation, a project that had consumed him in recent years. Dr. Caldwell offered a dry remark about the health benefits of sea air, while Miss Dunley entertained with tales of the theater. But Mr. Langley was less forthcoming, his responses curt, and his eyes fixed on Sir Reginald with an intensity that bordered on predatory. As the dessert course, syllabub with fresh raspberries, was served, Hastings found himself seated beside Mr. Travers, who was scribbling in his notebook. "A fine evening, Captain Hastings," Travers said, low and precise. "Though I confess I find large gatherings rather taxing. Too many variables." Hastings smiled, accustomed to such eccentricities. "You prefer order, Mr. Travers?" "Order is the foundation of justice," Travers replied, adjusting his pince-nez. "Without it, chaos reigns." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden clatter. Lady Beatrice had dropped her spoon, her face pale. "Forgive me," she said, her voice trembling. "I felt a sudden chill." Dr. Caldwell was at her side in an instant, his hand on her wrist, checking her pulse with professional calm. "Nothing to worry about, I'm sure," he said, though his eyes met Sir Reginald's with a fleeting look of concern. Hastings made a mental note of the moment, his unease growing. As the evening drew to a close, the guests retired to the deck for coffee and liqueurs. The sea was calm, the stars a glittering canopy overhead. Yet the atmosphere was anything but serene. Hastings caught snippets of hushed conversations, Miss Dunley whispering to Sir Reginald, Mr. Langley exchanging sharp words with his wife, and Travers scribbling furiously in his notebook. The tension, so subtle at first, was now palpable, like the hum of a distant storm. At precisely 10:47 p.m., as recorded by the ship's clock, a scream shattered the night. It came from the direction of the main cabin, sharp and piercing, followed by a heavy thud. Hastings leapt to his feet, his heart pounding. The guests froze, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Captain Mortimer appeared from the bridge, his expression grim. "Stay where you are, please," he ordered, his voice steady, despite the limp that slowed his stride. "I'll investigate." But Hastings, ever the man of action, followed close behind. As they reached the main cabin, the door stood ajar, revealing a scene that would haunt him for days to come. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lay sprawled across the floor, his eyes wide and lifeless, a crimson stain spreading across his pristine white shirt. A dagger, its handle encrusted with sapphires, protruded from his chest. The sapphire yacht, once a haven of luxury, was now the stage for a murder most foul. And as the guests gathered, their faces pale in the lantern light, Hastings knew one thing with certainty. Only Hercule Poirot, with his unparalleled genius, could unravel the truth hidden among them.
Chapter 2. The Crime. The air in the main cabin of the Sapphire yacht was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the stifling weight of shock. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lay motionless on the Persian rug, his once commanding presence reduced to a tragic tableau. The sapphire-encrusted dagger, a grotesque ornament in his chest, glinted cruelly in the soft glow of the cabin's chandelier. Captain Arthur Hastings stood frozen at the threshold, his pulse hammering as he took in the scene. The scream that had pierced the night still echoed in his ears, its source yet unknown. Behind him, the guests crowded near the doorway, their faces a gallery of horror, suspicion, and, in some cases, carefully masked indifference. Captain Mortimer, the yacht's weathered commander, pushed past Hastings with a muttered curse, his limp more pronounced in his haste. He knelt beside Sir Reginald, pressing 2 fingers to his neck, though the gesture seemed futile, given the pool of blood seeping into the rug. "He's gone," Mortimer said gruffly, his voice betraying a flicker of emotion. "Dead, stabbed through the heart by the look of it." A gasp rippled through the gathered company. Lady Beatrice Ashburn, her emerald necklace glinting like a beacon, clutched at Dr. Simon Caldwell's arm, her face ashen. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Reginald, it cannot be." Yet Hastings noted the way she darted not to her husband's body, but to the faces around her, as if gauging their reactions. Miss Clara Dunley, the young actress, swayed as though she might faint, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Who could have done this?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. Mr. Victor Langley, the financier, stood rigid, his earlier smirk replaced by a cold, calculating stare. His wife, Mrs. Evelyn Langley, clutched her knitting needles tightly, her knuckles white, though her expression remained oddly detached. Mr. Julian Travers, the solicitor, adjusted his pince-nez and scribbled something in his ever-present notebook, his lips pursed, as if cataloguing the scene for future reference. Hastings, his instincts sharpened by years of observing Hercule Poirot, scanned the cabin for details. The room was a study in opulence. Mahogany paneling, a crystal decanter of brandy on a side table, and a gilt-framed mirror reflecting the grim tableau. The dagger, however, was the focal point, a ceremonial piece, its handle intricately wrought with sapphires that matched the yacht's name. It was not a weapon one carried casually. It belonged here, perhaps as part of Sir Reginald's collection. A small desk in the corner held scattered papers, one of which bore a wax seal, partially broken as if it had been opened in haste. A single glass of brandy sat untouched beside it, its amber surface unrippled. "Who screamed?" Hastings asked, breaking the oppressive silence. The question hung in the air, unanswered for a moment, until Miss Elsie Tanner, the cook, emerged from the shadows of the corridor. Her face was pale, her apron twisted in her hands. "I did," she said, her voice quavering. "I came to bring Sir Reginald his nightly tea, as he requested. The door was ajar, and when I looked in—" She gestured helplessly toward the body, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't touch anything, I swear." Captain Mortimer rose, his expression grim. "Nobody leaves this yacht," he declared. "We're miles from shore, and I'll not have a murderer running loose. Mr. Blake," he called to the steward, who hovered nervously at the edge of the group, "secure the cabins and fetch the logbook. I want a record of everyone's whereabouts." But Hastings knew that such measures, while practical, would not unravel the knot of this crime. Poirot had persuaded him, and Poirot's analysis. "Captain Mortimer,"
Hastings said, stepping forward. "I suggest we preserve the scene exactly as it is. My friend Hercule Poirot will be joining us tomorrow. He is a detective of unparalleled skill, and I assure you he will find the truth." A murmur passed through the guests, some skeptical, others relieved. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She said, her voice sharp, "A detective? Do you imply one of us is responsible for this atrocity?" "It is a possibility, madame," Hastings replied, choosing his words carefully. "Until we know more, we must assume nothing." Dr. Caldwell, who had been quietly observing the body, spoke up. "The wound is precise," he said, his tone clinical. "A single thrust directly to the heart. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, or was extraordinarily lucky." "Lucky," Mr. Langley scoffed, his voice laced with disdain. "This was no accident. Doctor, someone meant to kill him." Mrs. Langley's knitting needles clicked softly, a strange counterpoint to the tension. "Perhaps it was a thief," she suggested, her voice barely audible. "The dagger, it's valuable, isn't it?" Hastings noted the suggestion, but dismissed it inwardly. The dagger had not been taken. It remained embedded in Sir Reginald's chest. This was no robbery gone wrong. The motive, he suspected, was far more personal. Captain Mortimer ordered the guests to return to the dining saloon, where they could be watched, while he and Mr. Blake secured the cabin. Hastings lingered a moment longer, his eyes sweeping the room once more. A faint scent caught his attention. Lavender, perhaps something sharper, like perfume. It was not the brandy, nor the blood, but something distinct. He filed the observation away, knowing Poirot would demand every detail. As the guests filed out, Hastings overheard fragments of conversation. Miss Dunley whispered to Dr. Caldwell, her voice trembling. "He was so kind to me. Why would anyone—" Mr. Travers, meanwhile, muttered to himself about discrepancies as he scribbled in his ever-present notebook. Lady Beatrice, supported by Dr. Caldwell, seemed on the verge of collapse, though her eyes remained dry. Mr. Langley, however, lingered at the doorway, his gaze fixed on the dagger with an intensity that sent a chill down Hastings' spine. In the dining saloon, the atmosphere was suffocating. The white roses, once a symbol of celebration, now seemed funereal. The guests sat in uneasy silence, their alibis unspoken but already forming in their minds. Hastings took a seat near the window, his thoughts racing. The yacht was a closed world, its inhabitants bound by the sea. No one could have boarded or left without notice. The killer, therefore, was among them. He glanced at the ship's clock, 11:03 p.m. The crime had occurred sometime between the end of dinner at 10:30 p.m. and Miss Tanner's scream at 10:47 p.m. A narrow window, but enough for a determined hand to strike. Hastings recalled the evening's timeline. After dinner, the guests had moved to the deck for coffee, but Sir Reginald had excused himself, saying he needed to review some papers in his cabin. Had someone followed him? Or had the killer already been waiting? Captain Mortimer returned, his face grim. "I've radioed the Coast Guard," he said. "They'll alert the authorities, but we're too far out for them to reach us before morning. For now, we stay vigilant." Hastings nodded, his mind already turning to the questions Poirot would ask. Who had the opportunity? Who had the motive? The dagger suggested premeditation, its presence in the cabin a clue in itself. Was it a weapon of convenience, or had it been chosen for its significance? And that scent, lavender or perfume, where had it come from? As the guests sat in uneasy silence, Hastings felt the weight of their secrets pressing in. Each face told a story, and each story hid a lie. He could only hope that Poirot's arrival would bring clarity to the darkness that had descended upon the Sapphire yacht. For now, the scene was set, the crime committed, and the stage prepared for the little Belgian detective to work his magic.
Chapter 3. The Arrival. The dawn broke over the English Channel with a deceptive serenity, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold that belied the grim reality aboard the Sapphire yacht. The vessel, anchored off the Devon coast, rocked gently in the morning swell, its opulent exterior at odds with the tragedy that had unfolded within. Captain Arthur Hastings stood at the bow, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where a small motorboat approached, bearing the one man who could untangle the web of deceit now ensnaring the yacht's passengers, Hercule Poirot. Hastings had barely slept, his mind replaying the events of the previous night. Sir Reginald Ashburn's lifeless body, the sapphire-encrusted dagger, the shocked faces of the guests, all lingered like a persistent fog. The crew had secured the main cabin, and the guests had been confined to their quarters under Captain Mortimer's watchful eye, but the atmosphere aboard was thick with suspicion. Hastings had sent an urgent message to Poirot via the Coast Guard's radio, and, true to form, the little Belgian detective had agreed to come at once, though not without a characteristic grumble about the unreliability of the sea as a setting for order. As the motorboat drew nearer, Hastings made out the familiar figure of Poirot, his diminutive form unmistakable even at a distance. Clad in an immaculate gray suit, a Homburg hat perched precisely on his head, Poirot sat rigidly in the boat, clutching his walking stick as if it were a lifeline against the rocking waves. His waxed mustache gleamed in the morning light, a testament to his unyielding commitment to neatness, even in the face of maritime chaos. The motorboat pulled alongside, and Poirot ascended the yacht's ladder with a dignity that belied his discomfort. "Mon ami Hastings," he called as he stepped onto the deck, his voice carrying a trace of reproach. "You have a singular talent for dragging Poirot into the most inconvenient of circumstances. A yacht, of all places, the sea. It is not sympathetic to the little gray cells." Hastings smiled despite himself. "I'm sorry, old chap, but you're needed. Sir Reginald Ashburn has been murdered, and I'm afraid it's a devil of a puzzle." Poirot's green eyes sharpened, the levity vanishing from his expression. "Murder, you say? Alors, tell me everything, but first let us find a place where the ground does not sway beneath my feet." They retired to the dining saloon, now cleared of its festive trappings. The white roses had been removed, and the table bore only a carafe of coffee and a few cups. Poirot seated himself with care, adjusting his cuffs and placing his walking stick beside him. Hastings recounted the events of the previous evening, the dinner, the scream, the discovery of Sir Reginald's body, and the peculiar details, the dagger, the broken wax seal, the faint scent of lavender or perfume. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled, his eyes half closed as if visualizing the scene. When Hastings finished, Poirot nodded slowly. "A closed circle, n'est pas? The yacht, it is a perfect stage for murder. No one enters, no one leaves. The killer is among us, Hastings, and they believe they have been clever. But no one is more clever than Hercule Poirot." He paused, his gaze flicking to the saloon's entrance where Captain Mortimer stood waiting. "Capitaine, if you please, summon the guests. I must see them, observe them before I inspect the scene of the crime." Mortimer nodded, his weathered face betraying a mix of skepticism and relief. "I'll have them here in 10 minutes, but I warn you, Mr. Poirot, they're a prickly lot. This murder stirred up more than grief." As Mortimer departed, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Tell me, mon ami, your impressions of these people. The heart of a mystery lies not only in the clues, but in the souls of those involved." Hastings hesitated, choosing his words carefully.
Lady Beatrice seems devastated, but there's something guarded about her, as if she's holding back. Dr. Caldwell is calm, almost too calm, like a man used to crisis. Miss Dunley, the actress, is shaken, but I caught her looking at Sir Reginald strangely during dinner. Mr. Langley, the financier, strikes me as calculating. He was watching Sir Reginald like a hawk. His wife, Mrs. Langley, is quiet, almost invisible, but I wonder if she sees more than she lets on. And as for Mr. Travers, the solicitor, he's obsessed with details, always scribbling in his notebook. As for the crew, Captain Mortimer is steady, but Miss Tanner, the cook, was hysterical after finding the body, and Mr. Blake, the steward, seems nervous. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Excellent, Hastings. You have observed much, though you do not yet see. The little gray cells, they will arrange these impressions into order. Now, let us meet this cast of characters. The guests filed into the saloon, their faces a study in contrasts. Lady Beatrice, dressed in mourning black, held herself with regal poise, though her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a lace handkerchief. Dr. Caldwell stood beside her, his gray eyes scanning the room with clinical detachment. Miss Dunley, her auburn hair pinned up, looked pale but composed, her actress's training evident in her controlled demeanor. Mr. Langley's jaw was set, his eyes darting between Poirot and the other guests. Mrs. Langley sat quietly, her knitting needles clicking softly. Mr. Travers adjusted his pince-nez and opened his notebook, ready to record every word. Poirot rose, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth and precise, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I have been called to investigate the tragic death of Sir Reginald Ashburn. A murder has been committed, and the truth it hides among you. I ask for your cooperation, for it is only through order and method that we shall uncover the guilty." A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through it, sharp and imperious. "Mr. Poirot, surely you do not suspect us. We were all together when it happened." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Madame, appearances are often deceptive. I will speak with each of you in turn, and I assure you, no detail is too small for Hercule Poirot. Now, if you please, I will examine the scene of the crime." Accompanied by Hastings and Captain Mortimer, Poirot made his way to the main cabin. The body had been covered with a sheet, but the blood-stained rug and the dagger, now placed on a table, remained. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes sweeping the room. He paused at the desk, noting the scattered papers and the broken wax seal. "This letter. It was opened recently, yes? The wax is fresh, the break uneven." Mortimer nodded. "Sir Reginald was reviewing documents last night. He said they were important, something about his foundation." Poirot's gaze shifted to the brandy glass, untouched. He leaned closer, sniffing delicately. "Lavender," he murmured. "Or perhaps something more. A perfume, perhaps, used to mask another scent." He turned to the dagger, examining its sapphire-encrusted handle. "This weapon, it is not a thing one carries lightly. It belongs to this cabin, does it not?" "Yes," Mortimer confirmed. "It was part of Sir Reginald's collection, kept on display above the desk." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "This killer, they have chosen this weapon deliberately. It is a statement, Hastings, a message. But what does it say?" As they returned to the saloon, Poirot's mind was already at work, arranging the fragments of the puzzle. The guests, the crew, the dagger, the scent, each was a piece, and Poirot would leave no piece unturned. "Hastings," he said softly, "this is no ordinary murder. The killer has planned carefully, but they have not accounted for Hercule Poirot. We begin, mon ami, with the truth hidden in plain sight."
Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The dining saloon of the Sapphire Yacht, bathed in the pale light of a cloudy morning, felt more like a courtroom than a place of celebration. The guests sat in a semicircle, their postures rigid, their eyes flickering between Hercule Poirot and one another. The air was heavy with the unspoken weight of suspicion, each person acutely aware that a murderer sat among them. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small, fastidious figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, as if peeling back the layers of civility to reveal the truths beneath. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to Poirot's right, marveled at his friend's ability to transform a room with his presence alone. Poirot's gray suit was immaculate, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, and his manner serene. Yet there was a quiet intensity about him, like a coiled spring ready to release. Hastings had seen this before, the methodical mind of Hercule Poirot preparing to dissect a puzzle with surgical precision. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "a crime has been committed, a life taken, a complice, n'est-ce pas? The truth, it hides, but it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. I will ask each of you to account for your movements last night, from the moment dinner concluded at 10:30 p.m. until the scream of Miss Tanner at 10:47 p.m. Be precise, if you please. The little gray cells, they demand order." A murmur of unease passed through the group. Lady Beatrice Ashburn, her black mourning dress stark against her pale skin, straightened in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is absurd," she said sharply. "We were all on deck, together, when it happened. Surely you cannot suspect us." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint sign of amusement. "Madame, the truth is a mosaic, and each of you holds a piece. I will begin with you, if you permit." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Very well. After dinner, I went to the deck with the others for coffee. Reginald said he had papers to review and retired to his cabin. I remained on deck until the scream. I did not see him after he left the saloon." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her handkerchief. "And at what time did you arrive on deck, madame?" 10:35, perhaps. I checked my watch when we left the saloon." Poirot turned to Dr. Simon Caldwell, whose calm demeanor seemed unshaken. "Doctor, your account, if you please." Caldwell's gray eyes met Poirot's with steady composure. "I accompanied Lady Beatrice to the deck after dinner, as did most of the guests. I remained there, discussing the sea air's benefits with Miss Dunley until the scream at 10:47 p.m. Then I went to the cabin and confirmed Sir Reginald's death." Poirot nodded, his finger steepled. "And you, Mademoiselle Dunley?" Clara Dunley, her auburn hair catching the light, spoke softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "I was on deck with Dr. Caldwell and the others. I spoke with Sir Reginald briefly before he left the saloon. He was kind, encouraging my career. I stayed on deck until the scream." Mr. Victor Langley, his jaw tight, spoke next. "I was on deck too, having a drink with my wife. We were together the whole time. Didn't see Sir Reginald after he left the saloon." Mrs. Evelyn Langley, her knitting needle still in her lap, nodded. "Victor and I were together. I was knitting, as always. We heard the scream and followed Captain Mortimer to the cabin." Mr. Julian Travers adjusted his pince-nez, his notebook open before him. "I was on deck, making notes on the evening's conversation. Sir Reginald's foundation plans interested me, potential legal implications. I stayed until the scream, then joined the others." Poirot turned to the crew. Captain Mortimer, his weathered face stern, said, "I was on the bridge, checking charts. I heard the scream at 10:47 and went to the cabin. Found Sir Reginald dead."
Mr. Harold Blake, the steward, fidgeted. I was clearing the saloon, then joined the guests on deck around 10:40. I heard Miss Tanner scream and followed the captain. Miss Elsie Tanner, still pale, spoke tremulously. I was in the galley, preparing Sir Reginald's tea. I brought it to his cabin at 10:47, found the door ajar, and saw him. I screamed and ran to the deck. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he absorbed each account, noting the precise times, 10:30 to 10:47, a mere 17 minutes. Merci, he said. Now, I must ask, did anyone see Sir Reginald after he left the saloon? Silence greeted the question, broken only by the faint creak of the yacht. Poirot's gaze lingered on Lady Beatrice, who shifted uncomfortably. Madame, you hesitated. Is there something you wish to add? Her lips tightened. No, Mr. Poirot. I said all I know. Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, you were on deck as well, yes? Hastings nodded. I was there from 10:35, near the railing. I saw most of the guests, but not Sir Reginald. I heard the scream and followed Captain Mortimer. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping the floor. A narrow window, my amis. Sir Reginald was alive at 10:30, dead by 10:47. The dagger, it was taken from the cabin's display. The killer had opportunity, but what of motive? I observe your faces, and I see secrets. Who among you spoke with Sir Reginald privately last night? Miss Dunley's hand twitched, but she remained silent. Mr. Langley's eyes narrowed, and Travers scribbled furiously. Poirot noted these reactions, his mind cataloging every gesture. No one? He pressed. Very well. I will return to the cabin. Hastings, accompany me. In the main cabin, Poirot moved with methodical precision, his eyes scanning every detail. The sapphire dagger, now on the table, drew his attention. This weapon, he mused, it is not merely a tool, but a symbol. Why choose it? To send a message, perhaps? He examined the desk, lifting the letter with the broken wax seal. This document, he said, it is a draft of Sir Reginald's will altering his foundation's beneficiaries. The seal was broken recently. By whom, I wonder? Hastings frowned. Could the killer have read it? Perhaps, Poirot replied. Or perhaps Sir Reginald himself broke it, moments before his death. He sniffed the brandy glass again, his nose wrinkling. Lavender, yes, but also something chemical. A clue, Hastings, but incomplete. As they returned to the saloon, Poirot addressed the group. I have seen the scene, heard your accounts. The truth, it is close, but it requires more. I will speak with each of you alone tomorrow. For now, rest, but know that Hercule Poirot watches. The guests dispersed, their faces etched with unease. Hastings watched Poirot, who seemed almost serene. What do you think, Poirot? He asked. I think, mon ami, that the yacht is a stage, and each player hides a role. The little gray cells, they are at work. Poirot's eyes gleamed, the hunt for truth well begun.
Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The sapphire yacht rocked gently on the morning tide, its polished decks gleaming under a sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the tension among its passengers. In the dining saloon, the atmosphere was taut, the guests' faces etched with a mixture of fatigue and weariness. Hercule Poirot, seated at the head of the table with his customary precision, sipped a tisane, his green eyes flicking from one person to another. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever observant of his friend's methods, noted the subtle way Poirot orchestrated the room, allowing silence to press against the nerves of those present. The little Belgian detective had a knack for letting discomfort reveal more than words ever could. The previous night's interrogations had yielded alibis, but Poirot had declared them incomplete, like a symphony missing its final movement. Now, as the morning progressed, the investigation took a new turn. Captain Mortimer had informed Poirot that the local police would arrive by midday, but until then the yacht remained a closed world, its secrets locked within its teak-paneled walls. The guests, aware of Poirot's reputation, shifted uneasily, knowing his scrutiny was unrelenting. Poirot set down his cup with a delicate clink. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "yesterday I heard your accounts. Today we delve deeper. A murder has been committed, and the killer, he is clever, but not so clever as Hercule Poirot. I observe, I listen, and I see the threads that unravel the truth. Let us begin with a question. Who among you had reason to wish Sir Reginald harm?" A collective intake of breath followed. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, her mourning black stark against her pale complexion, bristled. "Mr. Poirot, that is an outrageous implication. Reginald was a generous man, loved by all who knew him." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Loved, madame? Perhaps. But even the most generous heart can inspire envy, resentment, or betrayal. Let us consider the facts." At that moment, Mr. Harold Blake, the steward, entered the saloon, his face flushed. "Mr. Poirot, sir," he said, his voice trembling, "I've found something in the crew quarters. You'd better come see." Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and gestured for Hastings to follow. The guests exchanged uneasy glances as the two men left the saloon, accompanied by Captain Mortimer. In the cramped crew quarters below decks, Blake led them to a small locker belonging to Miss Elsie Tanner, the cook. Inside, tucked beneath a folded apron, was a vial of clear liquid, its label partially torn but bearing the word arsenic. Hastings' eyes widened. "Good Lord, Poirot! Poison? But Sir Reginald was stabbed." Poirot's expression remained inscrutable as he examined the vial, holding it to the light. "Oui, Hastings, but the presence of poison suggests complexity. This vial, it is a clue, or perhaps a distraction." He turned to Blake. "When did you find this, monsieur?" Blake replied, "Just this morning, sir. I was tidying the quarters, and it caught my eye. Miss Tanner's been acting strange since the murder, like." Poirot nodded, slipping the vial into a handkerchief. "We shall speak with Mademoiselle Tanner, but first return to the saloon, monsieur, and say nothing of this." Back in the saloon, the discovery of the vial sent a ripple of shock through the guests. Miss Tanner, summoned by Captain Mortimer, stood trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know how that got there," she cried. "I swear, Mr. Poirot, I never touched poison in my life. I only cook. Soups, roasts, nothing else." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "Mademoiselle, you found Sir Reginald's body at 10:47 p.m. You say you brought him tea. Was the door ajar when you arrived?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice quavering. "I knocked, but there was no answer, so I pushed it open. That's when I saw him, and screamed." "And the tea?" Poirot pressed. "Where is it now?" Tanner faltered. I dropped the tray when I screamed. It spilled on the rug." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A pity. The contents might have told us much. He turned to the group. "This vial, it suggests poison, yet Sir Reginald was killed by a dagger. Why then this arsenic? Is it a clue to another crime, or a red herring to mislead us?" The guests shifted uncomfortably.
Mr. Victor Langley, his voice sharp, spoke up. "It's obvious, isn't it? The cook's involved. She had access to the cabin, and now this poison turns up in her things. The police will sort her out when they arrive." Tanner gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't do it, I swear." Dr. Simon Caldwell, his tone measured, interjected. "Mr. Langley, let's not jump to conclusions. Arsenic could belong to anyone or have been planted. We must consider all possibilities." Poirot approvingly nodded. "Précisément, doctor. The obvious suspect is rarely the correct one. But let us explore further." He turned to Mr. Julian Travers, who was scribbling in his notebook. "Monsieur Travers, you are a man of details. Did you note anything unusual last night? Perhaps a conversation or a gesture?" Travers adjusted his pince-nez, his voice precise. "I observed that Sir Reginald seemed preoccupied during dinner. He mentioned his foundation several times, almost as if he were testing the room's reaction. I also noted that Mr. Langley left the saloon briefly at 10:32 p.m., returning a few minutes later." Langley's face darkened. "Are you accusing me, Travers? I went to fetch my wife's shawl from our cabin. She was chilly." Mrs. Evelyn Langley nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "That's right. Victor was only gone a moment." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A moment, madame, or several? The time, it is critical. Monsieur Langley, you returned at what hour?" Langley hesitated, then said, 10:36, I believe. I wasn't watching the clock." Poirot turned to Miss Clara Dunley, whose hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "Mademoiselle, you spoke with Sir Reginald before he left the saloon. What did you discuss?" Miss Dunley's cheeks flushed. He was encouraging my career, as I said. He offered to fund a new production in London. He was so generous." Her voice broke, and she looked away. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Generosity! It can inspire gratitude or resentment. Tell me, mademoiselle, did anyone else overhear this conversation?" Miss Dunley shook her head. "I don't think so. We were near the door, away from the others." As the questioning continued, Hastings watched Poirot's methodical approach, noting how each question seemed to probe not just facts, but motives. The arsenic, the alibis, the spilled tea, all were pieces of a puzzle, but some felt deliberately placed to mislead. Poirot, however, seemed undeterred, his mind sifting through the clutter of red herrings. Returning to the main cabin, Poirot examined the rug where the tea had spilled. "Hastings," he said softly, "the stain, it is uneven. Tea does not dry so quickly, yet this is nearly gone. And the scent, lavender again, but stronger here." He knelt, sniffing the rug. "Not tea alone, I think. Something else was spilled or added." Hastings frowned. "You think the tea was poisoned?" Poirot said, "Perhaps. Or perhaps the tea is another distraction. The dagger, it is the true weapon, but the killer wishes us to chase shadows." As they rejoined the guests, Poirot's demeanor remained serene, but Hastings knew his mind was racing. The arsenic, the alibis, the spilled tea, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. The police would soon arrive, but Poirot was determined to unravel the truth before they did, exposing the killer hiding behind the red herrings.
Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The Sapphire yacht, anchored off the Devon coast, seemed to hold its breath under the weight of the gathering storm clouds. The dining saloon, once a haven of elegance, now felt like a pressure cooker, its polished surfaces reflecting the strained faces of the guests.
Hercule Poirot, his gray suit as impeccable as ever, stood near the window, his gaze fixed not on the sea, but on the subtle interplay of glances among the company. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, marveled at Poirot's ability to see beyond the surface, his little gray cells sifting through the chaos of human behavior to uncover the truth. The morning's discovery of the arsenic vial had cast a shadow on Miss Elsie Tanner, the cook, but Poirot had dismissed the notion of her guilt as too convenient, too obvious. He had spent the past hour in private interviews, speaking with each guest and crew member alone, probing for inconsistencies. Now, as the clock struck 11, he gathered them once more, his demeanor calm, but his eyes alight with purpose. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "a crime such as this is like a tapestry woven with threads of truth and deception. One thread, if pulled, may unravel the whole. Today I have found such a thread, a detail, small but significant, that reveals an inconsistency." The guests leaned forward, their expressions a mix of curiosity and dread. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne clutched her handkerchief, her knuckles white. Mr. Victor Langley's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Miss Clara Dunley's hands trembled slightly, while Mr. Julian Travers adjusted his pince-nez, his pen poised over his notebook. Mrs. Evelyn Langley's knitting needles paused, and Dr. Simon Caldwell's calm facade flickered with a hint of unease. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Blake, and Miss Tanner, stood at the back, their faces etched with tension. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping the floor. "Let us return to the night of the murder. Sir Reginald left the dining saloon at 10:30 p.m., saying he had papers to review. At 10:47 p.m., Mademoiselle Tanner screamed, having found his body. A mere 17 minutes. Yet within this time, a murderer acted. But how? The door to the cabin was ajar, the dagger taken from its display. All of you claim to have been on deck, together, from 10:35 p.m. onward. Yet one of you lies." A gasp escaped Miss Dunley. "Mr. Poirot, how can you be sure? We were all there." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mademoiselle, the truth lies in the details. During my interviews, I asked each of you about your movements, your conversations. Most were consistent, but one detail stood out. A gesture, observed by our good Capitaine Hastings, that does not align with the timeline." Hastings blinked, caught off guard. "Me, Poirot? I didn't notice anything unusual." Poirot faintly, "You did, mon ami, though you did not know it. You told me you stood by the starboard railing, watching the guests. You mentioned a moment when Monsieur Langley returned with his wife's shawl at 10:36 p.m., but you also noted, in passing, that Madame Langley was not wearing her shawl when you saw her later, just before the scream." Mrs. Langley's knitting needles resumed their clicking, a rapid, nervous rhythm. I decided it was too warm. I set it aside." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet, madam, the evening was cool, as several of you remarked. Why fetch a shawl only to discard it? And, Monsieur Langley, you said you were gone a moment to fetch it. The cabins are but a minute's walk from the deck. Yet Monsieur Travers noted your absence from 10:32 to 10:36 p.m., 4 minutes. A small discrepancy, perhaps, but significant." Langley's face reddened. "Are you accusing me, Poirot? I told you, I fetched the shawl. Perhaps I lingered to light a cigarette." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monsieur. I accuse no one, yet. But this shawl, it is curious. May I see it?" Mrs. Langley hesitated, then retrieved a pale blue shawl from her cabin, handing it to Poirot. He examined it closely, his fingers tracing the delicate fabric. "A fine piece," he murmured, "but here—" He paused, lifting a corner to his nose.
a faint scent, not unlike the lavender I detected in the cabin, and something else, a chemical odor, perhaps. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. The same as the brandy glass, Poirot? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice low, or perhaps another distraction. But this shawl, it was not on the deck when the scream was heard. Where was it, Madame Langley? Mrs. Langley's eyes darted to her husband. I left it in our cabin after Victor brought it. I didn't need it. Poirot turned to Travers. Monsieur, your notebook is a treasure of precision. Did you see Madame Langley with her shawl at any point? Travers consulted his notes, his brow furrowing. No, Mr. Poirot. I noted her knitting, but no shawl after dinner. A murmur rippled through the group. Langley's voice rose. This is nonsense, Poirot. You're chasing shadows. The cook's vial of arsenic is far more damning. Miss Tanner flinched, but Poirot's gaze remained on Langley. The arsenic, monsieur, is a crude attempt to mislead. It was placed too conveniently, and Mademoiselle Tanner's distress is genuine. No, the truth lies elsewhere, in the small things, like a shawl that was fetched but not worn, or a scent that lingers where it should not. Poirot turned to the group. Let us consider the cabin once more. The dagger, it was taken from its display, yet no fingerprints were found. Only those of Sir Reginald, holding the handle as if to defend himself. The killer wore gloves, perhaps, or wiped the weapon clean. And the letter with the broken wax seal, its contents, they are known to some of you. Monsieur Travers, you mentioned Sir Reginald's foundation. Did he discuss changes to his will? Travers hesitated, then nodded. He spoke of redirecting funds to new beneficiaries, charities perhaps, or individuals. He was vague, but it seemed important. Lady Beatrice's handkerchief twisted in her hands. Reginald was always changing his mind about the foundation. It meant nothing. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. Madam, nothing is without meaning. The letter, the shawl, the scent, they are threads, and the time, it is the key. 4 minutes, Monsieur Langley, is enough to fetch a shawl, and perhaps to do more. Langley stood, his fists clenched. I won't stand for this. You've no proof. Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourself, monsieur. Proof will come. For now, I ask you all to reflect. The little gray cells, they work tirelessly, and they will find the truth. As the guests dispersed, Hastings followed Poirot to the deck, where the detective gazed at the sea. Poirot, Hastings said, are you suggesting Langley's the killer? That shawl business is odd, but it's hardly proof. Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, the shawl is a clue, but not the whole story. It points to a lie, a moment unaccounted for. The killer is clever, but they have made a mistake. The scent, the time, the letter, they will betray them. Hastings frowned. And the arsenic? A distraction, Poirot said dismissively. But the shawl, Hastings, it was in the cabin, I am certain. And that scent, it is the key to the killer's identity. As the clouds thickened overhead, Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle. The shawl, a small detail, had revealed a crack in the facade. The truth was closer, and Poirot would not rest until it was exposed.
Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The sapphire yacht, its gleaming exterior dulled by the overcast sky, seemed to shrink under the weight of its secrets. The dining saloon, once a stage for Sir Reginald Ashbourne's grand birthday celebration, now felt like a confessional where truths were unreluctantly unearthed. Hercule Poirot, his grey suit as pristine as ever, stood at the center of the room, his presence a quiet force that commanded attention. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from one guest to another, as if peeling back the layers of their carefully constructed facades.
Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, felt the tension in the air, a palpable strain that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. The morning's revelation about Mrs. Langley's shawl had cast a shadow over the group, particularly Mr. Victor Langley, whose defensive outburst had only deepened Poirot's scrutiny. The local police were due to arrive soon, but Poirot had made it clear he intended to resolve the mystery before they boarded. The truth, it does not wait for uniforms, he had murmured to Hastings earlier, his moustache twitching with determination. Poirot clapped his hands, drawing the guests' attention. "Mesdames and messieurs," he said, his voice smooth and precise. "We have progressed in our little investigation, but the tapestry of this crime remains incomplete. Lies have been told, alibis constructed with care, but the little gray cells they see through the fog. Today we uncover more, motives hidden in the shadows of the heart." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, her morning dress stark against her pale skin, clutched her handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Simon Caldwell maintained his clinical calm, though his fingers tapped lightly on the table. Miss Clara Dunley's hands were clasped tightly, her actress's composure faltering. Mr. Langley's jaw was set, his gaze fixed on Poirot with barely concealed hostility. Mrs. Langley's knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a strange counterpoint to the tension. Mr. Julian Travers scribbled in his notebook, his pince-nez glinting as he adjusted them. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Blake, and Miss Tanner, stood at the back, their faces etched with unease. Poirot began pacing, his walking stick tapping the floor. "Let us consider the motives. Sir Reginald was a man of wealth, influence, and generosity. But generosity, it can breed resentment. His foundation, it was to receive a significant portion of his estate, yes. But a letter in his cabin, its wax seal broken, suggests changes to his will. Who stood to gain or lose from such changes?" Lady Beatrice sharp. "Mr. Poirot, you tread on delicate ground. Reginald's affairs were private, even to me." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Private, madame. Yet you knew of his plans to redirect funds. Did you know to whom?" Her lips tightened. "He mentioned charities, perhaps a scholarship fund. He was always talking of such things." Poirot turned to Travers. "Monsieur, as Sir Reginald's solicitor, you were privy to his intentions. Speak, if you please." Travers hesitated, his pen pausing. "Sir Reginald consulted me about amending his will 2 days ago. He wished to allocate a substantial sum to a new theatre project in London to support young talent. He also mentioned reducing certain personal bequests." A murmur rippled through the group. Miss Dunley's face flushed, her eyes widening. "She spoke of my production," she said softly. "He wanted to fund it, to give me a chance to shine." Mr. Langley scoffed. "A theatre project, ridiculous. He was throwing money at a whim, neglecting more pressing obligations." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Obligations, monsieur. Such as?" Langley faltered, then said, "His business interests. I advised him on investments, you know. He owed us considerable sums for past ventures." Mrs. Langley's needle stopped. "Victor, you never mentioned debts," she said, her voice low but pointed. Langley shot her a look. "It was business, Evelyn, not your concern." Poirot pounced on the moment. "A debt, monsieur. How substantial? And was Sir Reginald unwilling to pay?" Langley's face reddened. "He was delaying, said his foundation took precedence. We argued about it yesterday afternoon, in private." Hastings leaned forward, his pulse quickening. An argument, a debt. This was new. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And where did this argument take place, monsieur?" "In the library," Langley replied, "around 4 p.m. No one else was there. Poirot turned to the steward, Mr. Blake, who stood nervously at the beck. Monsieur Blake, you move silently about this yacht. Did you overhear this conversation? Blake's eyes widened. I was passing by, sir. I heard raised voices, but I didn't linger. It's not my place. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the detail. And you, Mademoiselle Dunley, Sir Reginald's generosity to your theatre project, did it cause friction with others? Miss Dunley's voice trembled. I didn't ask for it, Mr. Poirot. He offered, said he believed in me, but she hesitated, glancing at Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice wasn't pleased. She thought it frivolous. Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. I thought no such thing. I supported Reginald's philanthropy, but I questioned the timing. He was under strain, making rash decisions. Poirot's mustache twitched. Strain, madame. From what source? She faltered, her handkerchief twisting in her hands. His health, perhaps. Dr. Caldwell would know. All eyes turned to Caldwell, who remained composed. Sir Reginald was in good health, as far as I knew, though he was preoccupied, perhaps anxious about his foundation. He mentioned receiving a threatening letter a week ago, but he dismissed it as a prank. Poirot's head tilted. A threatening letter. This is most interesting. Why was I not told of this before? Caldwell shrugged. He didn't take it seriously, and neither did I. It was vague, unsigned, warning him to beware his generosity. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And where is this letter now? In his cabin, I presume. He kept it in his desk. Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, we must examine this desk again. A threatening letter, a debt, a changed will. These are not mere threads, but ropes that bind the truth. In the main cabin, Poirot and Hastings searched the desk, finding a folded letter tucked beneath a ledger. The paper was plain, the handwriting blocky and deliberate. Your generosity will be your ruin. Beware. No signature, no date. Poirot sniffed the paper, his nose wrinkling. Lavender again, Hastings. The scent, it follows us. Hastings frowned. The same as the shawl and the rug? Perhaps, or perhaps a signature of the killer's presence. We must test these scents, but discreetly. Back in the saloon, Poirot addressed the group. A threatening letter, a financial dispute, a will in flux. These are the lies that surface. Each of you has a secret, a reason to resent Sir Reginald. But one of you acted. I will find you, with method and order. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. You're stirring the pot, old chap. Langley's debt, the letter. Do you think they're connected? Poirot smiled faintly. Everything is connected, Hastings. The lies, they pile like driftwood, but the truth, it is the spark that will set them ablaze. We are close, mon ami, very close.
Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The sapphire yacht, its once pristine decks now shadowed by the weight of suspicion, lay anchored under a sky heavy with impending rain. The dining saloon, where the guests had gathered yet again, was a crucible of tension, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot, his immaculate grey suit a stark contrast to the disarray of emotions around him, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to his left, felt the atmosphere crackling, as if the yacht itself were holding its breath, awaiting the next revelation. The morning had been a whirlwind of discoveries. Mr. Langley's financial dispute with Sir Reginald, the threatening letter, the pervasive scent of lavender. But Poirot had yet to unveil the full picture. His private interviews had continued, each guest and crew member subjected to his unrelenting scrutiny. Now, as the clock neared noon, Poirot had called them together, his demeanor suggesting a shift in the investigation.
Hastings knew his friend well enough to recognize the signs. Poirot was closing in, and someone was about to crack. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice as smooth as polished glass. We have peeled back the layers of this crime, revealing debts, secrets, and threats. But the heart of a murder lies not only in facts, but in the passions that drive them. Today, one of you will reveal a truth, a partial truth perhaps, but one that will bring us closer to the killer. The guests sat in uneasy silence. Lady Beatrice's Ashburn's handkerchief was a crumpled mass in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. Dr. Simon Caldwell's calm facade showed faint cracks, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Miss Clara Dunley, her auburn hair slightly disheveled, clutched the arms of her chair, her actress's poise faltering. Mr. Victor Langley's scowl deepened, his wife's knitting needles clicking faster, as if to drown out the tension. Mr. Travers scribbled in his notebook, though his pen trembled slightly. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Blake, and Miss Tanner, stood at the back, their faces pale with apprehension. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping rhythmically. Let us revisit the night of the murder. Sir Reginald retired to his cabin at 10:30 p.m., leaving you all on deck. At 10:47 p.m., Mademoiselle Tanner found him dead, stabbed with a sapphire-encrusted dagger. The alibis, they are neat, too neat perhaps, but one detail it knows at the little grey cells. The shawl of Madame Langley, fetched by her husband, yet never worn, and the scent, lavender or something more, found on the shawl, the rug, the letter. This scent, it is a signature, but whose? Mrs. Evelyn Langley's needle stopped abruptly, her hands trembling. Mr. Poirot, I've said all I know about the shawl. I didn't need it. Why do you keep returning to it? Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone was firm. Madame, the shawl is a clue, but it is also a shield. You protect someone, I think. Your husband, perhaps, or yourself. Victor Langley's face flushed. Leave her alone, Poirot. She's done nothing. Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourself, monsieur. The truth, it will emerge, with or without your permission. Let us turn to another matter. The letter, the threatening letter found in Sir Reginald's desk. Your generosity will be your ruin. A warning, yes, but also a clue to motive. Who stood to lose from Sir Reginald's generosity? He turned to Miss Dunley, whose face paled. Mademoiselle, you said Sir Reginald offered to fund your theatre project. A generous act, but one that caused friction, no? Miss Dunley's lips quivered. Yes, but I didn't ask for it. He insisted, said it was his duty to support art. I was grateful, truly. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through like a blade. Grateful or opportunistic? Reginald was taken in by your charm, Miss Dunley. I warned him you were after his money. Miss Dunley's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. I cared for him. He was like a father to me. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Hastings leaned forward, his heart racing. This was new, a personal connection, an emotional tie. Poirot's gaze sharpened, but he did not press her immediately. Instead, he turned to Dr. Caldwell. Doctor, you mentioned Sir Reginald's anxiety. Did he speak of Miss Dunley or of others who might resent his decisions? He hesitated, his grey eyes flickering. He was concerned about certain relationships. He felt some took advantage of his kindness, but he named no one specifically. Poirot nodded, then turned to Travers. Monsieur Travers, the will,
You said Sir Reginald planned to reduce personal bequests. Who was affected? Travers cleared his throat, adjusting his pince-nez. He intended to redirect funds from Lady Beatrice and Mr. Langley to the foundation and Miss Donnelly's project. It was not finalized, but he was resolute. Lady Beatrice gasped, her handkerchief falling to the table. "Reduce my bequest? He never told me." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, madame, you knew of his plans. Your reaction yesterday when I mentioned the will, it was not surprise, but fear. Why?" Lady Beatrice's composure crumbled, her voice breaking. I overheard him speaking with Travers 2 days ago. He said he wanted to secure his legacy, to do more for others. I was hurt, yes, but I didn't kill him. I loved him." The admission hung in the air, raw and trembling. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who remained serene, though his eyes were alight with satisfaction. This was the emotional turning point he had sought, a crack in the facade, a glimpse of truth. Poirot stepped closer to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, your love, it is not in question, but love can coexist with anger, with betrayal. Did you visit Sir Reginald's cabin that night?" "No," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I stayed on deck, as I said." Poirot turned to Miss Tanner, who flinched under his gaze. "Mademoiselle, you found the body. You said the door was ajar. Did you see anyone near the cabin before you entered?" "No, sir. I was in the galley until I brought the tea." Poirot's gaze shifted to Mr. Blake, the steward. "And you, monsieur, you move like a shadow. Did you see anyone near the cabin between 10:30 and 10:47? Blake's face paled. I saw Mrs. Langley in the corridor, near her cabin, around 10:35. She was holding her shawl, looking upset." Mrs. Langley gasped, her needles clattering to the floor. "I was fetching my knitting. I told you I didn't need the shawl." Victor Langley stood, his voice thunderous. "Enough! You're hounding my wife for no reason." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Monsieur, I hound no one. I seek the truth, and the truth, it is close. Madame Langley, your shawl carried the scent of lavender and something chemical. The same scent was in the cabin. Can you explain this?" Mrs. Langley's eyes filled with tears. I can't. I don't know how it got there." Poirot nodded, as if expecting this. "Very well. The truth, it will speak for itself. For now, I ask you all to remain vigilant. The killer is among us, and their mask is slipping." As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and doubt, Hastings followed Poirot to the deck. "You've rattled them, Poirot. Your Lady Beatrice's outburst, Mrs. Langley's shawl. Do you think they're involved?" Poirot gazed at the sea, his expression inscrutable. "Mon ami, the heart has spoken today, and it has revealed much. Lady Beatrice hides her pain, Mrs. Langley her fear. But the scent, Hastings, it ties them to the crime. We are close, very close to the truth." The yacht rocked gently, but the storm within was breaking.
Chapter 9. The Trap. The Sapphire yacht, its elegant form cutting through the gentle swell of the English Channel, seemed to hum with anticipation as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across its decks. The dining saloon, now a familiar stage for Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth, was filled with an almost unbearable tension. The guests, their faces drawn and their eyes wary, sat in a semicircle, each aware that Poirot was closing in. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near his friend, felt the weight of the moment, as if the very air vibrated with the promise of revelation. Poirot, his gray suit immaculate and his mustache perfectly symmetrical, stood at the head of the table, his presence a quiet storm ready to break.
The morning's emotional outbursts, Lady Beatrice's tearful admission, Mrs. Langley's faltering defense, had cracked the facade of civility aboard the yacht. Poirot had spent the intervening hours in quiet observation. His private interviews with the crew and guests yielded subtle clues that he now wove into a net. Hastings knew this was the moment Poirot thrived in, the setting of the trap, where psychological pressure would force the killer to betray themselves. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice smooth but edged with steel, we stand at the precipice of truth. A murder has been committed, and the killer, they are among us, believing they have outwitted Hercule Poirot. But no one outwits the little gray cells. Today, I will lay a trap, and the guilty, they will stumble. The guests stiffened, their eyes darting to one another. Lady Beatrice Ashburn clutched her handkerchief, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. Simon Caldwell's calm facade showed faint signs of strain, his fingers interlaced tightly. Miss Clara Dunley's hands trembled, her actress's poise crumbling under Poirot's scrutiny. Mr. Victor Langley's scowl deepened, his wife's knitting needles clicking furiously as if to ward off the tension. Mr. Julian Travers adjusted his pince-nez, his notebook open but untouched. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Harold Blake, and Miss Elsie Tanner stood at the back, their faces pale with apprehension. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping the floor with deliberate rhythm. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Sir Reginald retired to his cabin at 10:30 p.m. to review papers, a will perhaps, or a letter that threatened his generosity. At 10:47 p.m., Mademoiselle Tanner found him dead, stabbed with a sapphire-encrusted dagger. The alibis, they are precise, yet one is false. The shawl, the scent of lavender, the broken wax seal, these are not mere details, but signposts to the truth. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. I propose a test, mes amis. The killer, they were in the cabin between 10:30 and 10:47. They left a trace, the scent of lavender, mixed with a chemical note, found on the shawl, the rug, and the threatening letter. This scent, it is distinctive. I have asked Captain Mortimer to bring a vial of lavender essence from the ship's stores, and I will compare it to the scent in the cabin. But first, I ask, who among you uses such a perfume? A heavy silence followed. Lady Beatrice spoke first, her voice sharp. Mr. Poirot, this is absurd. Lavender is common. Any of us might have it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Common, madame? Perhaps, but not this blend with its chemical undertone. Let us see. He nodded to Captain Mortimer, who produced a small vial of lavender essence. He opened it, sniffing delicately, then shook his head. No, this is not the same. The scent in the cabin, it is unique. A perfume, perhaps, or a lotion used by the killer. Mrs. Langley's needle stopped, her face paling. I use lavender water, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But it's ordinary, nothing special. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze piercing. May I see it, madame? Mrs. Langley hesitated, then retrieved the small bottle from her cabin, handing it to Poirot with trembling hands. He sniffed it, his expression unreadable. Interesting, madame. It is close, but not exact. The chemical note, it is missing. Yet your shawl carried it. Can you explain? I can't, she cried, her voice breaking. I told you I don't know how it got there. Victor Langley stood up, his fists clenched. This is harassment, Poirot. Leave her alone. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. The crepe, it is not for Madame Langley alone. Let us consider another detail. The dagger, it was wiped clean of fingerprints, save for Sir Reginald's. But the killer, They were in haste. They left the shawl, perhaps, or another trace. I propose we search the cabins, now." A murmur of protest rose, but Poirot's voice cut through. "Capitaine Mortimer, with your permission, I will begin with Monsieur and Madame Langley's cabin. Hastings, accompany me." The search was swift but meticulous. In the Langley's cabin, Poirot examined a small vanity table where Mrs. Langley's lavender water sat alongside other toiletries. He paused at a bottle of hand lotion, sniffing it carefully. "Voila," he murmured. "Lavender, with a chemical note, almond-like, perhaps. Cyanide. Hastings, this is the scent." Mrs. Langley, who had followed with her husband, gasped. "That's just my lotion. I use it daily." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, madame, it was in the cabin, on the rug, on the shawl. How?" She shook her head, tears streaming. "I don't know. Someone must have taken it." Victor Langley's voice was thunderous. "This is a set-up. You're framing her." Poirot remained calm. "No, monsieur, I frame no one, but the lotion, it places you, or your wife, near the crime. Let us return to the saloon." Back in the saloon, Poirot addressed the group. "The scent, it is confirmed. Madame Langley's lotion was in the cabin, yet she denies being there. Someone used it, or placed it to mislead. And the shawl, fetched by Monsieur Langley, yet not worn. Why?" Miss Dumley spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Poirot, could someone have borrowed the lotion to throw suspicion?" Poirot nodded. "Precisely, mademoiselle. The trap, it is set. The killer, they see their plan unraveling. I give them this chance. Confess now, and the truth will be gentler." The room fell silent, the guests' faces pale. No one spoke, but their eyes betrayed fear, guilt, or defiance. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, his trap tightening. "Very well," he said softly. "The truth will come, with or without confession." As the guests dispersed, Hastings leaned close. "Poirot, you're pushing them hard. Do you think Mrs. Langley's lotion is the key?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The lotion, Hastings, is a clue, but not the whole truth. The killer has stumbled, and tomorrow we will see them fall." The yacht rocked gently, but the trap was set, and Poirot's net was closing around the guilty.
Chapter 10. The Reveal. The sapphire yacht lay still under a sky bruised with storm clouds, its opulent interior now a stage for the final act of Hercule Poirot's investigation. The dining saloon, bathed in the dim light of late afternoon, was suffused with an almost suffocating tension. The guests, their faces etched with dread and anticipation, sat in a tight semicircle, their eyes fixed on the diminutive Belgian detective who stood at the head of the table. Hercule Poirot, his gray suit immaculate, his mustache perfectly symmetrical, exuded a calm authority, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of truth. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to his right, felt his pulse quicken. He knew this was the moment Poirot had orchestrated, the grand unveiling of the killer's identity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant, "we have journeyed through a labyrinth of lies, red herrings, and half-truths. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lies dead, stabbed by a sapphire-encrusted dagger, and the killer, they are among us. But the little gray cells, they have worked tirelessly, and now the truth, it will be revealed." The guests stiffened, their gazes darting nervously. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne clutched her crumpled handkerchief, her face pale but defiant. Dr. Simon Caldwell's clinical composure wavered, his fingers gripping the table's edge. Miss Clara Dunley's hands trembled, her actress's poise shattered. Mr. Victor Langley's scowl was thunderous, his wife's knitting needle silent for the first time. Mr. Julian Travers adjusted his pince-nez, his notebook closed as if sensing no further notes were needed. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Harold Blake, and Miss Elsie Tanner, stood at the back, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick tapping the floor. Let us reconstruct the crime step by step, with method and order. Sir Reginald retired to his cabin at 10:30 p.m. on the night of his murder, to review papers, perhaps a will or a threatening letter, warning, "Your generosity will be your ruin." At 10:47 p.m., Mademoiselle Tanner found him dead, the dagger in his heart. The alibis, they are precise. All claim to have been on deck from 10:35 p.m. onward. Yet one of you was in that cabin, and the clues, they betray you. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The dagger, taken from its display, bore only Sir Reginald's fingerprints, suggesting he grasped it in defense, or that it was wiped clean. The shawl of Madame Langley, fetched by her husband, yet never worn, carried a scent, lavender with a chemical note like cyanide, found also on the rug and the threatening letter. The vial of arsenic in Mademoiselle Tanner's wonker, a crude distraction. The broken wax seal on a letter altering Sir Reginald's will. These are the threads, and they weave a pattern. He turned to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, you spoke of your love for Sir Reginald, yet you knew he planned to reduce your bequest. You overheard his discussion with Monsieur Travers, and your pain, it was real. But did it drive you to murder?" Lady Beatrice gasped, her voice sharp. "No, I loved him, despite his decisions." Poirot nodded, moving to Monsieur Langley. "Monsieur, your debts to Sir Reginald were a source of anger. You argued with him at 4 p.m., and your absence from 10:32 p.m. to 10:36 p.m., 4 minutes, not one, places you near the cabin. Did you kill to settle a score?" Langley's fists clenched. "I fetched a shawl, nothing more. You've no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he turned to Mrs. Langley. "Madame, your lotion with its distinctive scent was in the cabin. You claim ignorance, yet your shawl was there. Were you protecting your husband or yourself?" Mrs. Langley's voice trembled. "I told you, I don't know how it got there." Poirot moved to Miss Dunley. "Mademoiselle, Sir Reginald's generosity to your theatre project caused friction. You spoke with him privately, and your tears, they suggest a deeper bond. Did you fear losing his support?" Miss Dunley's eyes filled with tears. "He was kind to me like a father. I would never harm him." Poirot turned to Dr. Caldwell. "Doctor, you knew of Sir Reginald's anxiety, his threatening letter. Your calm, it is too perfect. Did you act to protect a secret?" Caldwell's gray eyes met Poirot's. "I am a physician, not a murderer." Finally, Poirot addressed Travers. "Monsieur, meticulous in all things, you knew of the will's changes. Did you act to preserve your influence?" Travers adjusted his pince-nez. "I served Sir Reginald faithfully. I had no reason to kill." Poirot paused, letting the silence build. "The truth, it is not in the alibis alone, but in the psychology. The killer is clever, but they made mistakes. The shawl, the scent, the letter, they point to one person, one motive." He turned to Mrs. Langley, his voice softening. "Madame, you have protected your husband, but the truth cannot be hidden. Monsieur Langley, you were in the cabin at 10:35 p.m. You argued with Sir Reginald not about debts, but about his will. He planned to cut you out entirely, redirecting funds to Miss Dunley's project and his foundation. You took the dagger, struck in anger, and wiped it clean. The shawl, you used it to carry the lotion, planting it to implicate your wife, knowing her scent would mislead. The arsenic, a crude distraction, placed in Mademoiselle Tanner's locker to shift suspicion." Langley leaped to his feet, his face red. "This is outrageous. You've no evidence." Poirot raised a hand. "The evidence, it is in the details. The lotion, found only in your cabin, was on the rug, a drop, spilled in haste. The shawl,
seen in your wife's hands by Monsieur Blake, was left in the cabin. The letter, its seal broken by you, not Sir Reginald, to confirm your exclusion. And your absence, 4 minutes, enough to kill and return." Mr. Langley sobbed, her voice breaking. "Victor, tell them it's not true." Langley's defiance crumbled, his shoulders sagging. I didn't mean to. He laughed at me, said I was a fool to expect more. I lost my control." The room erupted in gasps. Lady Beatrice covered her face, Miss Dunley wept, and Caldwell's calm shattered. Poirot's voice was steady. "Monsieur Langley, you have confessed. The police, they will take you when they arrive. The truth, it is always found by Hercule Poirot." As Captain Mortimer escorted Langley away, the saloon fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over the guests. Hastings looked at Poirot in awe. "You did it, Poirot, but how did you know?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The little gray cells, mon ami. They see what others miss, the scent, the time, the heart of the killer." The storm clouds broke, rain pattering against the windows as the yacht awaited the police. The truth, finally, laid bare.
Chapter 11. The Reflection. The Sapphire yacht, its gleaming decks slick with the rain that had begun to fall, seemed to exhale as the storm broke, mirroring the release of tension within its walls. The dining saloon, now dim under the grey light filtering through the rain-streaked windows, was quieter than it had been in days. The guests, their faces a mix of relief, shock, and lingering unease, sat in subdued silence, the weight of Victor Langley's confession still settling over them. Hercule Poirot, his grey suit as pristine as ever, stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes contemplative. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, felt a profound sense of closure, yet he knew Poirot's work was not complete until he had reflected on the case, as was his custom. The police had arrived shortly after Langley's confession, their motorboat cutting through the choppy waves to board the yacht. Langley, his defiance replaced by a hollow resignation, had been taken into custody, his wrists bound as he was led away under Captain Mortimer's stern supervision. The guests had watched in silence, their earlier suspicions and accusations now irrelevant in the face of the truth. Yet Poirot remained, his presence a quiet anchor in the aftermath of the storm. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "The crime is solved, the guilty revealed. Monsieur Langley has admitted his act, driven by greed and wounded pride. But before I depart this yacht, I wish to reflect, to share with you the philosophy of Hercule Poirot. For a murder is not merely a puzzle, but a mirror to the human soul." The guests turned their attention to him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. Lady Beatrice Ashburn, her mourning black softened by the grey light, clutched her handkerchief, her eyes red but dry. Dr. Simon Caldwell sat with his hands folded, his clinical demeanour restored, but tempered by a new humility. Miss Clara Dunley, her auburn hair tucked behind her ears, looked weary, her earlier tears replaced by a quiet resolve. Mrs. Evelyn Langley, her knitting abandoned, stared at the table, her face etched with betrayal and sorrow. Mr. Julian Travers closed his notebook, his pince-nez glinting as he listened intently. The crew, Captain Mortimer, Mr. Harold Blake, and Miss Elsie Tanner, stood at the back, their relief palpable, but tinged with unease. Poirot paced slowly, his walking stick silent against the carpeted floor. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashburn was a crime of passion, but not of love. It was born of resentment, of a man who saw his ambitions thwarted by another's generosity. Monsieur Langley, he believed himself entitled to Sir Reginald's wealth, yet when that wealth was to be redirected to Mademoiselle Dunley's theatre, to charities, to a legacy greater than his own, he struck. The dagger, it was a symbol of his betrayal, taken from Sir Reginald's own collection to wound him in body and spirit. He paused, his gaze settling on Mrs. Langley. "Madame, you suffered most, I think. You protected your husband, even unknowingly, by your silence about the shawl.
Your lotion, with its distinctive scent, was used to mislead, but it was your loyalty that was exploited. The heart, it is a fragile thing." Mrs. Langley's voice trembled. "I never imagined. Victor was ambitious, but I thought he loved me." Poirot's eyes softened. "Love, madame, can blind us to truth, but you are not to blame. The fault lies with the one who acted." He turned to Beatrice. "Madame, your pain was real, yet you hid your knowledge of the will's changes. Why? To protect your dignity, perhaps, or to shield your heart from the truth of your husband's shifting priorities?" Lady Beatrice's lips tightened. "I loved Reginald, Monsieur Poirot. I would have accepted his choices, even if they hurt." Poirot noted, moving to Miss Dunley. "Mademoiselle, your bond with Sir Reginald was genuine, a paternal affection. Yet it made you a target of envy, a pawn in the killer's game. Your innocence, it shines through." Miss Dunley's eyes glistened. "He believed in me. I'll honor his memory with my work." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Coldwell. "Doctor, you're calm. It was a shield, but also a clue. You knew of Sir Reginald's anxieties, yet you did not press. Your restraint, it served the truth." Caldwell inclined his head. "I did what I thought right, Monsieur Poirot." Finally, Poirot addressed Travers. "Monsieur, your meticulous notes aided me greatly. Your devotion to detail, it mirrors my own. But beware, details, they can obscure the heart if not tempered by understanding." Travers adjusted his pince-nez, a faint smile on his lips. "I shall remember that, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot stepped back, his voice rising slightly. "This case, it teaches us that greed and pride, they are the seeds of destruction. Sir Reginald sought to do good, to leave a legacy of kindness, yet it provoked envy. The little grey cells, they see not only the clues, the shawl, the scent, the letter, but the motives behind them. The truth, it is found not by chance, but by method, by observing the human heart." Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. "Poirot, you make it sound almost poetic, but how did you know it was Langley, truly?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Mon ami, it was the shawl, the lotion, the timing. Langley's absence of 4 minutes, his anger at the will's changes, his use of his wife's scent to mislead, these were not accidents. The arsenic, a clumsy distraction, only confirmed his desperation. The little grey cells, they arranged the puzzle, and the picture was clear." The guests sat in silence, absorbing Poirot's words. The rain patted against the windows, a soft requiem for the tragedy that had unfolded. Captain Mortimer stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, the police have asked that you join them for a final statement. They'll be taking Langley to shore." Poirot nodded. "I will come, Capitaine, but my work here is done." He turned to the guests. "Mes amis, I leave you with this. Live with truth, for lies, they lead only to ruin. Adieu." As Poirot moved toward the door, Hastings followed, his heart heavy but relieved. The yacht, once a floating palace, was now a place of mourning, yet Poirot's presence had restored order. Outside, the rain began to ease, and the horizon hinted at clearing skies. Poirot paused at the railing, gazing at the sea. "Hastings, the sea," he said softly, "it is vast, but the human heart, it is vaster still. We have seen its depths, and we have prevailed." With a final nod, Poirot descended to the waiting motorboat, leaving the sapphire yacht to its ghosts and its lessons, his genius having illuminated the darkness once more.
Chapter 12. The Departure. The sapphire yacht, its once gleaming silhouette now softened by the mist of a rain-soaked afternoon, rocked gently against the Devon coast. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with tentative rays of sunlight, as if nature itself were signaling the end of the darkness that had enveloped the vessel. The dining saloon, stripped of its former grandeur, was nearly empty, the guests having retreated to their cabins to grapple with the aftermath of Victor Langley's confession. Hercule Poirot, his gray suit as impeccable as ever, stood at the starboard railing, his walking stick resting lightly in his hand. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever his loyal companion, stood beside him, the weight of the solved mystery settling into a quiet satisfaction. The police had departed with Langley in custody, their motorboat vanishing into the mist, leaving the yacht in a state of uneasy calm. The guests, though relieved that the truth had been uncovered, were subdued, their earlier tensions replaced by introspection. Poirot, however, seemed serene, his green eyes fixed on the horizon, as if contemplating not just the case, but the broader tapestry of human nature. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant, "the sea, it is a mirror to the soul, is it not? It hides its depths, yet reveals them to those who look closely. This case, it has shown us the peril of greed, the fragility of trust, and the power of truth." Hastings nodded, his thoughts lingering on the events of the past days. "You were remarkable, Poirot, the way you pieced it all together, the shawl, the lotion, the letter. I thought Mrs. Langley might have been involved, or even Miss Dunley, but you saw through it all." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Mon ami, you see, but you do not always observe. The little gray cells, they arrange the chaos into order. Monsieur Langley, he believed himself clever, using his wife's lotion to mislead, planting the arsenic to cast suspicion on Mademoiselle Tanner. But the details, they betray the guilty. The scent, the timing, the broken wax seal, they spoke louder than his lies." Hastings glanced back at the saloon, where the remaining guests were beginning to emerge, their faces pale but resolute. Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, her mourning black softened by a gray shawl, stood alone, gazing at the sea. Miss Clara Dunley, her auburn hair catching the light, spoke quietly with Dr. Simon Caldwell, whose calm demeanor had returned. Mr. Julian Travers, his notebook tucked away, adjusted his pince-nez, his expression one of quiet respect for Poirot's genius. Mrs. Evelyn Langley, her knitting abandoned, sat apart, her eyes distant with the pain of her husband's betrayal. "Poor Mrs. Langley," Hastings murmured. "She protected him even when she didn't know the truth." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Hastings. The heart, it is loyal, even to its own detriment. Madame Langley's love blinded her, but it also preserved her innocence. She will heal in time, though the scar will remain." Captain Mortimer approached, his weathered face softened by gratitude. "Mr. Poirot, I don't know how to thank you. This yacht was a floating prison until you came. The police have their man, and we can move forward." Poirot inclined his head. "Capitaine, it is my duty to restore order where chaos reigns. But I caution you, watch your passengers closely. The heart, it recovers slowly from such wounds." As Mortimer returned to the bridge, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, our time is done. The motorboat awaits to take us to shore. I long for the stability of terra firma, where the ground does not sway beneath my feet." Hastings chuckled. "You never did like the sea, Poirot. But you must admit, this case was one for the books, a classic, like one of Dame Agatha's own." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, Hastings, but the story, it is not for the books alone. It is a lesson, to live with truth, to guard against the temptations of greed and envy. Sir Reginald, he sought to do good, and for that he paid the ultimate price. We must honor his memory by learning from it." The motorboat's engine hummed in the distance, signaling their departure. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, his movements precise as always. "Come, Hastings, London awaits, and with it perhaps another puzzle for the little gray cells." As they descended the ladder to the waiting boat, Hastings glanced back at the sapphire yacht, its name gleaming faintly in the sunlight. The vessel, once a symbol of opulence, now carried the weight of tragedy, yet Poirot's genius had brought light to its shadows. The guests, too, would carry forward, their lives forever marked by the events of these days. The motorboat pulled away, the yacht receding into the mist. Poirot sat rigidly, clutching his walking stick, his eyes fixed on the shore.
"Hastings," he said softly, "the world, it is full of mysteries, but none so complex as the human heart. Yet, with method and order, we prevail." Hastings smiled, his admiration for his friend unwavering. The sapphire yacht faded into the distance, its secrets laid bare, as Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, sailed toward the next challenge, his legacy as enduring as the sea.